Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Glenn has held his doctorate in psychology for more than 30 years and is also a former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leave the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Now, before we get started, if you haven't yet downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, it's the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston, and I'm here with...
Oh, that would be me, Howie Jacobson from Sick to Fit, Plant Yourself, and Ask Howie.
That would be you, the inimitable Howie Jacobson. Howie, I want to talk to you about something today.
Yeah.
And what I want to talk to you about is the notion that people are incapable of dealing with their feelings of rebelliousness. The idea that they can't make a rule because it's going to make them feel too rebellious. And they've been taught that rules are bad because anything that stimulates that inner rebel is going to lead to a binge. Can we talk about that?
Oh, yeah. Sounds cool.
What do you think about that, first of all? You hear that from people?
People that I work with, either they're not as upfront or as aware. Like, they don't give me the meta reason. They just rebel. I think the people you're working with, maybe because of the way you're working with them, get to that realization. So I'm sure that I see the dynamic. I don't know that people can identify it and name it.
It's a very common dynamic and explanation in the eating disordered community, like eating disorder treatments and stuff. It's one philosophy that says that the way to work with eating disorders is to tell people that food rules are bad. They're a type of mental restriction which stimulates a binge due to rebelliousness, and you have to work around the rebelliousness. That's always bothered me. I've always felt like if you don't have any rules, then you don't know what you're aiming for. And if you don't know what you're aiming for, then you're probably going to hit something else. What's wrong with drawing a bullseye and trying to hit it? And if you don't hit it, what's wrong with assessing exactly by how much you missed and in what direction so that you have the appropriate feedback to aim better the next time? It's always this notion that you have to fuzzy up the bullseye and you can't really aim at a clear target vis-a-vis defining exactly how you want to be with a particular food. I've always thought that was wrong for the reasons I just described. I've always had the idea that there is this earlier developmental phase where it's kind of like the terrible twos that we all go through, where everybody knows who's had a kid that when they get to that, the answer to everything is no. No this, no that, no this, no that. You know that you have to be creative when you're working with 2-year-olds to get them to go in the car or eat their vegetables or go to the doctor or go to school. You got to be creative in how you talk to them, how you ask them things, because their initial reaction is going to be no.
Luckily, that phase only lasts 20 or 30 years in my experience.
Right. I mean, that's a joke, but it seems like people have reified that phase of life. They've reified that and said, well, there's no possibility of maturing beyond that, so I'm just going to reify it and work around my inner 2-year-old forever. Then it hit me that rebelliousness is really no different than any other feeling. There are a lot of people who say, well, I'm too anxious. I have to overeat to get rid of the anxiety. Or I was too angry and I had to eat at this person. This person really pissed me off, and so I have to eat at them. Or I'm too depressed, and the only thing that gives me comfort is XYZ food. And it struck me that those types of statements, and so I'm too rebellious, I can't allow myself to do something that's going to make me feel more rebellious. What underlies all of those statements is a philosophy of life. And that philosophy of life is that I am at the mercy of my emotions. I need to do what I feel. But the problem with that is that while emotions can be useful, they can motivate us to do things and they can motivate us to connect with other people, they can also be wildly inaccurate and they're not factual. I always say feelings aren't facts. Most of the time, they're not factual. They can be a source of information, but relying on them as your primary source of information for important decision-making is a problem. I found that maturity involves a recognition of the fact that feelings aren't facts and a shift to a life philosophy that says, I make important decisions with my head. I will consider my feelings. I will be aware of my feelings. In some circumstances, I will nurture my feelings. But when it comes to making important decisions, for example, about what to put in my mouth or not, or who to marry or how to live, I'm not going to solely go based upon my feelings. I'm going to adopt a way of life that says my intellect is in control because my intellect is more reliable. My intellect is more capable of delaying gratification to make a more strategic and wise choice. My intellect is more capable of directing my life energy towards things that are going to genuinely serve me in the long run and my loved ones. And so I just see rebelliousness as falling into that whole paradigm. And it's just another part of the same problem where people are giving primacy to their emotions no matter what. And some people are surprised that a psychologist would say this, but I don't think our emotions should be given primacy no matter what. I think all the things I said. So I think rebelliousness is just another feeling that we need to separate from and make food decisions with our head. And the only way to do that is to have a very clearly defined goal so you can aim at it and get appropriate feedback to aim at it better the next time. What do you think?
There's so much good in there that I've been taking furious notes or cheerful notes. Furious.
I can see a cartoonist making a furious note. Yeah. Go ahead.
I've become friends with a cartoonist. It's really cool. I don't feel like I'm good at drawing, but I'm beginning to see the world that way. Like, anyway, so I love that idea. Like, I'm at the mercy of my emotions is kind of a core life philosophy. And, the way I frame it is there are emotions that I am unwilling to tolerate, right? Which then becomes kind of a statement for living. That becomes the decision. Like, one of the things that I've loved learning is for people to take responsibility for their actions, right? Instead of saying like, oh, a binge happened, like I chose to eat that Snickers bar. For me, it's part of the same language.
Change passive to active language.
Yeah. So like I'm at the mercy of my emotions is the same thing as saying I am unwilling to feel certain emotions. I don't think of rebelliousness as an emotion so much as an interpretation. So a lot of people are very fused with their rebel status. We live in a society that has a love-hate relationship with rebellion. It's almost like our relationship with sex and sexuality. We have toxic forms of rebellion, just like, I'm going to get this pierced or that pierced. Rebellion in which I end up not being autonomous, but simply having 0 degrees of freedom because whatever the other person or institution says, then I have to rebel against it. What's underneath the rebellion? Perhaps it's a need for autonomy. I want to have more control over my life. That's, I think, the developmental stage of the terrible twos is right. Like if I don't go through that, then I never can individuate.
Right.
Right. But if I never get out of it, I never individuate either.
Right. You're a slave to the rebelliousness. So you don't have your autonomy either.
Right. When I've been working with rebellious people, I point out to them and I try to get them to recognize that the way they're eating now is something they need to rebel against.
Yeah. Right.
Right. You just told me you didn't have any choice. Like you didn't want to eat that cheeseburger, but you ate it anyway. Don't you want to rebel? You're already following rules.
Right.
Right. Is that the rule you want to follow?
Right.
How about rebelling against that rule?
People just don't recognize that there's a secondary gain to treasuring the rebelliousness.
Yeah. It's something I picked up from Stephen Hayes' book, A Liberated Mind, which is like the idea of rules as things we can look for in our lives. What's the rule that means that I can't speak my mind in this particular situation?
Mm-hmm.
Any limitation that I have, we can conceive of it as rule-based. I have some rule, like I can't do this because it's not safe, or it's not my place, or who am I, or I can't let that go, or I have to defend this perspective. What's the rule that I'm following here completely unconsciously?
It's a rule to say that I always have to listen to my inner rebel. That's an unwritten rule. So the question is whose rule you're going to follow. The rebels are your own, your pigs are your own. Growing up means choosing your own rules.
Right, right. Yeah, to be individuated. It's harder, right? Because you have to decide what they are and live by them. Like that requires taking responsibility. That requires accountability. Binging is kind of the opposite.
Exactly.
A couple other thoughts what you
Please.
said raised for me. I think we differ a little bit. Like, I'm a much bigger fan of emotions as guidance. It just might be, a matter of degree. But when I think of like, I don't want my emotions to rule my life, I think of it in two ways. One is that the emotions that I'm feeling are almost never emotions of presence. It's almost never the emotional response to this moment. If I could be fully present, embodied, aware, and responding to this moment, my emotions would be a pretty good guide. In fact, that's what they're there for, right? To move me out of danger and towards safety and abundance and whatever. But when my wife says something and I fly off the handle, it's almost never what she said. It's what it reminded me of, right? It's like this brain pattern that says, okay, that she said is just like what your mother said when that time. And then I have an emotional reaction to something that's 52 years old.
Exactly.
Right. It's like, that's why I don't trust my emotions. That, and when I'm hot, right, I know that my amygdala has just shut down my neocortex.
Yes, that makes the emotional experience ripe for transference from a previous experience that pulls you out of the present moment, which interferes with your ability to make good decisions in the present.
Yeah. If I were truly in touch with my emotions, I wouldn't be feeling rebelliousness. I might be feeling sorrow or fear or shame or depression. I feel like the rebelliousness is like a secondary emotion when I'm unwilling to feel the primary one. And then I get to act out and be proud of myself, then have a hangover later and go, oh God, what did I do?
There you go. Did you have another thought?
For me, the big thing that I'm working with all my clients on is their willingness to feel discomfort in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the bigger we can make that, the more whatever the X is, whether it's rebelliousness or anxiety, depression or rage, whatever that is, I've come to realize, as I'm approaching my late 50s, the goal of life isn't happiness. Like, it's taken me a long time to kind of figure that out. That if I'm trying to be happy all the time, it's like every day has to be like today. It's a beautiful spring day here. The sun's shining. It's, 68 degrees. There's a light breeze. And I'm like, this is the weather. This is what the weather should be, and then tomorrow it's going to rain. I'm like, no, bad weather.
Yeah. The essence of maturity is frustration tolerance, right?
Ooh, I like that. If I had room on my ass, I'd get another tattoo.
I wish I could unhear that.
The essence of maturity is frustration tolerance.
Yeah. If you've got frustration tolerance, not frustration for the sake of frustration, but frustration tolerance for the sake of accomplishment, for the sake of being able to recognize that there are things you can do to make your life better tomorrow that involve feeling worse today, for the sake of understanding that sometimes you have to feel worse to do better. The other aspect of maturity is what we call object constancy, which is where frustration tolerance actually develops from. It's kind of like way back in developmental psychology, the infant needs to develop a frustration tolerance when good mommy isn't there. So mommy's there and she's feeding me and she's warm, and then all of a sudden she's not there. And if mom is regular enough, then I don't get overwhelmed by the buzzing, booming confusion and lack of breast milk and lack of warmth and lack of comfort right then, because I know that my good mom will come back. And if mom isn't regular enough, then that frustration overwhelms people and they don't develop frustration tolerance with regards to other people, knowing that good mom will return. So when you try to help people in relationships, we would all like to think that we matured out of that, but virtually nobody has really totally matured out of that. You can see that it's hard for them to, my days as a couple therapist, it's hard for them to hold on to each other, to the good memories and good feelings they have of one another when they're having a fight, or one of them is traveling, or there's just not the availability of the other person in that way. At that point, a lot of people often turn to an addiction, because the reliability of gratification from a bottle of alcohol or a bag of chips, as horrible as it is, that bag of chips is always there for you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's your toxic imitation of good mommy.
Right. And so if you can develop a frustration tolerance and say, well, good mama's not here now, I'm okay by myself, and maybe there's some other good mamas around, They call that object constancy in the psychological literature. It's really just frustration tolerance with regards to people and relationships. So
It makes me think that not binging might end up ultimately being a game of peekaboo.
I could see a new technique developing.
No,
There's,
like almost seriously, like, okay, this big juicy cheeseburger represents pleasure and comfort. And it's because I don't believe there is pleasure and comfort anywhere else.
Yeah.
Even though it might be a phone call away, or 5 deep breaths away, or a journal entry on gratitude away, or diving into my feeling of anxiety and being grateful for my ability to hold it. Like, all of those are strategies that I can reliably count on to comfort myself.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they often feel like peekaboo. They're not there. When they're not there, they don't exist anymore. Like, I can't tell you how many times in my life, and this is like recent, like in the last 2 weeks, I wish I could remember that certain types of breathing calms me down.
Yeah. The problem is that we are so wired for comfort that our brains want to develop automaticity and like instantaneous gratifications that we have become accustomed to. Those tapes play automatically, and you really have to do everything you can to insert a space between stimulus and response, so you have the experience that you can be uncomfortable and not go for the bag of chips or the cheeseburger. Do one of the things that you suggested, which I am totally in favor of. Howie, I got to go in a second. I'm sorry.
It's always a pleasure chewing the plant-based low-fat fat with you. Awesome.
Okay, be well.
Bye.
Bye.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. Now, if you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.